in our building. Eileen King is the Deputy Executive Director of MSMA, but she's the Executive Director of the Maine School Superintendents Association. So we tend to try to serve both. I try to do more of the school board's communication, and Eileen King really tries to do more of the superintendents. However, our paths cross as we also try to provide support with whoever calls and whoever is available. Keeping information confidential as we need to, and working with the various boards and superintendents who call. One of our things that we try to do is provide board development, usually at the request of the board chair or the superintendent, to be able to help new board members come on, find out what the role of the board is, work through maybe some specific questions that you might have as it relates to board membership and the role of the board. If we can continue on through. First of all, I know your names, and thanks very much for the name tags. That helps. Plus, I have a list right here. That's really helpful. The other part, though, in terms of trying to identify who has been on the board for 2 years or more.
Just me.
Yeah. So I've done work with the Scarborough School Board before, and not recognize many faces or names. I knew pretty much this was a board that I hadn't been down to work with. Eileen may have been here maybe a couple of years ago for maybe an introductory workshop on superintendent search. I can't remember, but I know that was a possibility. But in terms of tonight, you have on the left-hand side of your packet, there are slides that mirror, and we've got so many screens here. It's terrific, but wherever you can see, there'll be a slide that'll match what you have in the left-hand packet. We're not going to go through all the slides, but I did have them there available in case we have questions about some certain things tonight. And then on the right-hand side of your packet are handouts. Again, we're not going to go through all of them, but there are certain ones that we do want to highlight as it relates to things that Shannon and I spoke about in trying to make sure we focused on tonight. And the two highlighted areas that we spoke of really were, well, actually there were three. Roles and responsibilities of board members. Another one was use of email and communications within the board, how that is structured. And then really a third thing, what constitutes meetings, where and how they can occur amongst board members. So those would be the three biggies. And then there are some policies that you have in your policy manual, as well as some that I brought as samples from MSMA that I think you probably also have, but I just wanted to make sure we highlight in today's environment, your kind of climate, in terms of things that are being asked, boards are being asked to review and be aware of as different questions come up from members of the public that you might have. And so we'll kind of focus on them a little bit as well. If there's anything else that comes up, then that's something that we want to make sure we try to hit as well. And we will finish up certainly by 10:07, so you can make a smooth transition into your board meeting here for 7 o'clock. Go one more slide if you could, Jeff. Well, actually, I'm sorry. You can go back. That's one of the reasons why. Go backwards. Here we go. So tonight we will review the Maine School Boards, the statutes in terms of where you get your authority. Boards, we feel it's very important that you think about yourselves as a team. We'll talk about that and how you, as an individual, you contribute to the 7-member board that you have, as well as your 2 student members. And then learn a little bit about how school boards are unique in a way that you're different from selectmen, you're different than town and city councils, you're different than legislators. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So given that kind of broad overview, are there things that you specifically, other than the things I've talked about so far, as a board member that you've experienced so far, are there things that you would like to make sure that we talk about, or has there been a burning question that you've had given the opportunity to speak about this tonight? Anything that comes to mind?
Every once in a while, I'm glad to hear, because I don't know what I don't know. So I don't know what to ask you. But I do from time to time hear comments about there's like too many or not enough like not everybody's on the email, it's emailed, and I know you said you'd get to that. So just diving into that a little bit more and understanding the nuances there would be helpful.
Okay,
Like, what can I do? and What can't I do?
yeah. Anything else?
I know we had one question about when email constitutes meetings.
Mhm.
Yeah, that I think I shared that one with you.
You
though,
did.
But yeah.
So we will definitely talk about that. Anything else? Okay. I'd like to keep it as informal as we can, so yes, we're being videoed, we're live streaming or whatever, but break in when you have a question or something comes up that it hit a nerve, make sure that we stop and have a chance to talk about what it is you're mentioning now. And I see you've got the statute book out. That's one good way of being able to see where your authorities and responsibilities come. The other one is online. I always go to maine.gov, go to legislature, go to statutes, and then go to Title 20A. And that's a really fast way of trying to find, something you might specifically be looking for. The only thing I don't like about that is there's not a keywords search. So you have to kind of identify, what it is that you want. Go ahead.
There's a helpful search. If you do search the text, you can narrow
Yeah.
it by statute, so you can do it, but you have to be familiar with searching statutes,
That's
but
right.
it's there. You
Yeah.
can search it, but it's buried.
Yeah. So with that, one of the first things that I just wanted to mention, when you were first elected, you did have to come to the town office and be sworn in, right? That's all. I mean, once the election happens and you're sworn in, then you legally can serve as a school board member. That oath, which is in your slide as well as up on the screen, there are a couple of things there that I think that are really, really important. One is discharge your abilities, the duties incumbent on you as a school director of Scarborough, board member of Scarborough, according to the Constitution and the laws of the state. So the two things I'd like to point out, okay, your guidance, your authority is really given to you from the Constitution as well as the statutes in the state. Now, you also have a town charter here, city's charter in Scarborough. So there are some certain things that you have to abide by here through your charter. But primarily, you're given guidance through the Constitution and the statutes. Now, the statutes, as I mentioned, they're in Title 20A. They're in subsection 1001. And in that subsection 1001, there are 22 different duties that are given to school boards. And I mentioned that they're given to school boards because it's not individual board members that they're given to, it's the school board. And we'll talk about why that distinction is important and necessary in just a minute. But please remember the oath that you've taken, and people will ask you, and this was a bone of contention, and I'll talk about it real quickly, but it was a bone of contention, I would say 4 years ago in 2019, when there tried to be a law passed that said that school boards will be responsible to their citizens or their constituents or to the taxpayers. That's different than being responsible to the Constitution and the statutes, because it's the statutes, it's the Department of Education rules and chapter, it's the guidelines and statutes in Title 20A and the Constitution that you're responsive to, and not the whims and wishes of your taxpayers. Now, I'll say that statement. At the same time, I will make sure that I also modify that with, you have people that you want to make sure you're listening to, and your townspeople are people you want to be listening to in a variety of different ways. You want to be inviting them into public comment. You want to be interacting with them in a positive, interactive way. And you do want to be listening to them in terms of votes you take and that type of thing, but you're not directly responsive, and responsible to the people, within the town. Your primary responsibility is to the students of the district, as well as what's in the best interest of the district, of the Scarborough School Department. That may be different than some people in the community who want you to vote a particular way. So you as a board, when you come together, you're coming together with a lot of your individual thoughts and thoughts that you've heard from a variety of people around the community about certain things, and that perhaps is helping frame your reference as it relates to how you might vote as you come to the table to interact with a specific agenda item. But then you've got that also, that filter in terms of what's the law say? What's in the best interest of all of our students? And you've got a large number of students with a variety of buildings. You've got facilities you need to take care of. You have resources that you need to provide for a variety of different places. So when you come to take a look at your budget, you're thinking about, okay, well, what is in the best interest of all of our students? You know, is it some curriculum issue? Is it a facility issue? Is it a field issue? Is it, athletics or band or some other, co-curricular opportunity that you want to provide for your students? So those are all the kinds of things you're thinking about. And then in the back of your mind or the side of your mind, you've got a neighborhood of folks or people within town who say, well, no, I think you ought to do it this way. And so that's the rub that I think you feel as board members, in terms of people talking with you about how they want you to operate the schools. And then it's important that you listen, but it's also important that you take into account what's in the best interest of students, all students. So that's students with special needs, that's students with who are gifted and talented, that's students who want to participate in all the activities that you provide, that's students who may be of a different color or race or gender or, however, students are presented as they come to you within schools. But, it's all the students and you together trying to make decisions that work in the best interest of those students. So are there questions about that? Because that's really one of the biggest questions right now that's come up across the state in terms of, well, you're not listening to me. You're not paying attention to me. You're not represent, I voted for you, and therefore, you need to, vote in this particular direction. I don't know if those kinds of conversations or questions have come up for you yet, but I certainly know that they have in the past, and they have in other places, across the state. So I'd like to stop, right here, just see if you have questions about that, or whether you want to talk about that a little more, or whether this raises questions for you.
Raises question for me. I'm trying to think through how to articulate it best. So where does it say? Because I've always thought of, I always hear some say that just exactly what you said, our job is to look after the best interest of the students. And I always, yes, I agree. And I always have the other, I feel like I'm a 50-50 split because I was elected.
Yes, you're elected to be a school
So-
board member.
Yeah.
Once you're elected to be a school board member, then you have responsibilities as a board to function as a board to make decisions in the best interest of students and the district. And that is where the rub comes, because you're still a community member, you're still a parent, you're still a neighborhood resident. Yeah, and you visit with folks in the store, and then you see them around town, and they're talking to you about what's going on in the schools and what their wishes, might be for the schools. So those are all pieces of information that you take in, definitely.
Is there somewhere in 20A subsection 101 or Freyla's, our resident lawyer's book?
There are a couple places. So
It-
So if we go to the next slide or two, Jeff, in that 20A, I don't know if I have it in the next slide or not, probably don't. No. But if you go to section 1001, basically what it says in that first broad category above duties of school boards, that's what it says, duties of school boards. Now, then it has, and we'll talk about this a little bit. If you could go to handout number 1, as well as your handout number 2. Handout number 1 is a summary of those 22 powers and duties within the law book. And so it talks about legislative and policymaking, educational program, personnel and employment, quasi-judicial, which means when you're acting as a kind of a judge and jury in some situations, budget, finance, school facilities, and communication with the public. So that's a summary of those 22 different items within that. And then within your policy BBA, you reiterate and said the powers and duties of the Board of Education will be conferred and prescribed by law. Responsible for management of the schools, will adopt and direct the general course of study, and will provide programs in kindergarten through grade 12. In the interpretation of the powers and duties, it's understood that the board will act as a governing body in the determination of general policies for the control, operation, maintenance, and expansion of the public schools. Will delegate administrative matters to the superintendent. So policy is broad. It doesn't list, specifically in terms of what things happen, but in handouts number 1 and 2, that generally kind of reiterates what I said in terms of what it is that you are supposed to be doing. I do have some other follow-up paperwork that I'd like to just refer to you that Carolyn, I think, gets to your question as well. Handout number 3, because that question came up in the latter part of 2019, Sarah Forster, the Assistant Attorney General, was asked to research and write a letter back to the Commissioner of Education, Pender Macon, about, okay, so what is the role of the school board as it relates to the public? And so this letter was researched and was using or did use a court case, a Maine Supreme Court case that did speak to who is the school board or the Board of Education at the local level responsible to. It speaks about a case that was decided in Yarmouth, and it was a number of years ago, but the concept still holds. And I'd just like to read the footnote at the bottom of that page where it speaks about the case. It was Shaw versus Small, and the issue was the right of an orphan to attend school in the town where his guardian resided. The school committee denied him access to school because, among other things, they felt that too many wards of the state were being placed in their town, which was an unequal burden that the town shouldn't be obligated to bear. So in that instance, the school board said, no, we're not going to take this student. We're not going to allow him to come into school. The law court, in ordering the student be admitted to school, held that the school committee was obligated to follow the law with respect to residency, not their views about the fairness of the law to their town. So using that as the guidance, the Assistant Attorney General basically speaks about this in the middle 2 paragraphs on the front page, where she says the Maine Constitution affords control over education to the Maine legislature. School boards are creatures of statute with their duties and responsibilities described therein. The nexus of the current about school boards, responsibilities for and responsiveness to their respective communities appears to be the statement contained in a decision of the Maine's law court that the school committee acts as a public board. It in no sense represents the town. Its members are chosen by the voters of the town, but after election, they are public officers deriving their authority from the law. Now, I think that statement is harsh, but I think it also describes pretty, clearly in terms of who your responsibility is to. It's to the students. And so from the law to this interpretation of that particular case, it helps decide and define, where your responsibility is to. But it also creates that rub that I think you have, between, okay, this is what we want for our students, but this is our community, and this is we're hearing from our community as well. So how do we balance that in making our decisions? And those relate to policy, those relate to budget, those relate to a whole number of things that you have to decide upon.
How do you define, who defines what's best for students? I mean, is that, and Jeff, I'll pick on you for a second. You might say, I'm just thinking, I'm the finance committee. So, that may say we need, we've got 9% increase or something like that. And I might say, right, I might say we need a 50% increase. Because X, Y, and Z, we have all these unmet needs, we need to increase by X%. Where do you draw the line as to who defines what's best and what?
And that's where that's where your important conversation comes from you as a board, because really it helps. I mean, it's going to depend upon, okay, what's your mission and vision statement? Where do you align your resources with your goals in terms of, are you making decisions that are based on those things that support what you want, for students? And then it's really in terms of your conversation, if it has to do with the financing, what can we sustain? You know, what can we maintain? And in terms, you're going to be making some priority decisions, you know, as it relates to finances as well as programming and or schools or what have you. But that's where the seven of you are so important in helping define, okay, for this year within this budget or within this policy, within this practice, you know, this is what we think are in the best interest of our students in Scarborough. That's where school boards are local. But you also have to go by the law and you have to go by the Constitution and by policy and chapter and rule of the state. But you get to decide in terms of what's in the best interest of students for you. I mean,
Well, and you know, how we've described how we build a budget starting in December, right? Where we're starting with, you know, I mean, all of it is framed with what do we need for students and for kids, right? And then so that takes feedback from staff, from our leadership team, you know, by building. And then we expand out from there, right? And that's a open, transparent, but the whole building a budget each year starts with that premise of we're going to build a budget based on student needs. You know, what our kids need.
which is very different than if you were to go to the city council, town council and say, okay, all right, what should our budget be this year? And they say 2%, 5%, 4%, you know, whatever, and give you a dollar number and say, okay, this is what your budget could be. That's very different than, okay, well, what do we need for students? And then, okay, then how do we identify, how does that match with what can be sustained, you know, for the community?
No, that's interesting because in my private world and the world that I live and work in, like for me, presenting a budget that and I'm not picking on this year's budget, I'm just saying in general, so just in general. So if I were to present a budget that I knew wouldn't get passed, like I just wouldn't do that. But so are you saying that we present what we think is best and then it's their job to say yay or nay or make changes? How does that?
I've seen it done a lot of different ways,
Yeah.
and I think that's really dependent upon the strategy and
Yeah.
of the board as well as of the superintendent and what your relationship is with the city council. In terms of making that determination, in terms of what's your starting point, you know, what do you think it can be sustained if you're going for a building as well as something else, you know, is this year to be asking for a turf field, you know, at the same time you're asking for a building, you know, so you know, those kinds of things that, you know, come into your considerations and your conversations.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
No.
monopolize the conversation.
It's an important conversation because really, if you go to the next slide, Jeff, it really does speak to this issue as well, where you campaign or you're elected to the board individually. But then, you know, as soon as you're elected, you come on, you're sworn in, you come to your first meeting and all of a sudden you're working together as a team. So it's team development is an important component of school board work because you're together a lot, and it's better if you know a little bit about each other in terms of what your values are and how you can determine how best you can work with one another. Sometimes I also think that it's good for you to have retreats or some other times like this where you can have a casual conversation or more informal conversation rather than just being at board meetings where you're interacting to agenda items where it is business. You know, but where you do have some time to get to know each other a little bit differently than you're just, you know, within the formal structure of the meeting. So you're taking some time to do that, and we'll get into a little bit of another component later on, but having some time for professional development of you as board members. You know, what do you need as board members to be able to do your job better? And you know, sometimes that's identifying, you know, with each other in terms of that question. Sometimes it might be calling myself or Eileen or you're talking with another board locally to identify, you know, what is it they do that might be of interest to you to be able to help them. One thing that I know that a lot of boards do, and maybe you do this already, Jeff, I'm not sure, but do you have summer retreats where you take a look at, what are your goals as it relates to, your mission vision? What's been the performance of the, school over the course of the state of the school, looking at, okay, well, what are we doing and being able to report data back to the board.
Yeah, and that's actually been done in between Thanksgiving and
Yeah, we're in a weird
Years,
period
but
right now
new
because,
board members come on in November after
Yeah.
the November election. So however, that's
but that's
changing.
changing. Yeah, so
So-
we're in a weird,
Right,
in
and
between
so
place right now.
ideally, at least from my perspective, ideally, the board retreat, doing like whether it's a full day or part day, something like that is something I've done before. In August, as we're ramping up to open the school year in terms of setting those yearly goals and benchmarking progress and evaluation, those kind of thing is taking advantage of that time period would be ideal.
So part of that work also is, one of the responsibilities of the board is to, hold, the superintendent accountable in terms of, how is he leading and guiding the school to meet the goals that have been established by you as a district, you as a board, and being able to demonstrate, to you through himself as well as staff that he might bring to you, the data that, demonstrates, how you as a school district are doing. You've got one employee, and that's the superintendent. You hire the superintendent. It's best if you do some check-ins, throughout the year to see how things are going. Both for his sake as well as your sake, so you don't get to the end of the year evaluation and there are some things you wish you would have had a chance to talk about, mid-year. But also from his perspective, he wants to be able to let boy, things are really tough right now. Things are really, and it's important, we think, for boards to be able to be in a position to, yes, be responsible as a board and listen to your publics, but also be in a position where you can support your superintendent. Because it's important for superintendents to feel support from their board. It's important for Maine, for your individual communities to be able to have superintendents that have some longevity in your districts. The average turnover for a superintendent last I knew was 2.8 years. The best opportunity for superintendents to feel as if they're in a district and have a chance to make a difference is 5 to 7 years. So you want to make sure there's some longevity, of the person. And the way to do that is to feel as if there's support and you're providing that kind of support for them to be able to help do their job in guiding the district. His responsibility is to supervise and have evaluated other staff within the district. It's not your role as board members to supervise and evaluate other staff members. It's his job and members that he hires that would do that. That brings me to another, quick little conversation about hiring, and I'm sure Jeff has done this as he's brought new people to you, but he has a legal authority and a legal responsibility to bring to you for approval teachers and principals. By statute, there are two positions where he has to bring them to you. He has to nominate them to you. You have to approve or disapprove, but hopefully approve if he's brought them to you. And then once they've been approved, he then can offer a contract to the specific individual. So it's a 3-part process. Now, what I don't know, in Scarborough, do you also bring other people to the board, either for information or for their approval? All people, ed techs?
No, but definitely like other administrative.
Mhm. Right.
and teachers.
And teachers.
Yeah, definitely teachers. So that would be social workers and counselors and speech and language pathologists and those types of things, right? Nurses, yeah. Brian, hi. Good, how are you?
Got a folder, Brand.
And a pen, Brian.
Souvenir, nice.
You're welcome.
It really depends, but you're doing well with those.
All right, good deal.
They last.
Are there questions about hiring? Was that new to anybody? No. So that's good.
I have a quick question about hiring.
Sure.
So when when like we first came on the board, they moved up the town council meeting to get us sworn in, and like the next day we were on the board, so it happened very quickly for the 3 of the newbies.
Yeah, you're it. Let's go do it, right?
Yeah, and like they immediately were like, here's all the coaches for the fall sports or winter sports, or I don't remember what, winter probably, this was November. And so we looked at it and it was like, what are we supposed to evaluate? I mean, we put our trust in the superintendent Jeff. He does the search and hiring, and that's a very transparent process. I participated in one of those decisions, and so I've seen it kind of from that side. But are we a rubber stamp, or do we have any, like, what is the role of looking over? Because I can look at this, but I presumably, I trust Jeff enough he's not gonna make someone forward and be like, this is a terrible choice that we've decided to make. Will you please approve it? So he's gonna, he's not gonna do that. He's gonna be like, this is the person that we've chosen out of the pool. This is the best candidate. I trust our process. I've seen it firsthand, but I trust our process and I trust our superintendent. So what is our role other than fulfilling the statute of looking at that? Are we supposed to evaluate it critically? Or is it just a look over to make sure nothing crazy is happening?
So a couple different comments and a question I have. So let me ask first, do you have the board approve coaches? Approve or give information to them as an FYI?
No, they approve.
They approve, okay. So like teachers, you put that list forward and then.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
You have a lot of personnel that come through here. You're a big system. You've got a lot of folks that are doing a lot of different roles that you play. So in that particular way, typically for stipended positions, coaches who are important, certainly within your organization, typically that level is put forward. You do that as a block of names primarily, right?
Yeah.
And does that list of names go out to the committee before? And so is that part of the packet that you received beforehand?
Yeah.
Okay, here's what I would recommend in that
Yeah.
case. If you see the names of the list of names before, and you wish to have a specific conversation about an individual, or maybe more than one individual, then I ask you to get in touch with the superintendent right away. And perhaps he then would revise that list and put a different list forward so that it's possible for you to have executive session conversation about certain staff members. That typically doesn't happen, but sometimes it does happen. But the better time is to do it ahead of time instead of having that same question come up at a board meeting. And so he's got this list of 25 names, and all of a sudden, 2 names you want to have removed and then talk about in the executive session. And it's awkward for the superintendent, it's awkward for you, it's awkward for the individuals who are on that list and have some questions. So may have some questions about. So that would be true also if there were a teacher that were on a list, to be nominated. And the same thing would be true about a principal. So if there's anything like that, please don't wait till the board meeting, because one of the things that I will talk about in our short time together is trying to avoid surprises at a board meeting in the public. Because as board members and a superintendent, there's nothing worse than getting to a board meeting and feeling as if you're unprepared and looking unprepared in the public's eye, for the meeting. So you as a school board, as a team, want to feel like you're well-oiled. And again, not a rubber stamp, because I will implore you to be informed and to have as much information as you can, to have both the process be transparent, but also for you to be making informed decisions and not feel as if all you're doing is blindly, supporting what the superintendent presents to you, because he's going to be as open as he can be and as give you as much information as needed. Now, to go back to what Jeff mentioned before, he probably for more, I would say important, but larger role positions like a director of special services or a curriculum director or a facilities director or somebody else who has broad district responsibility, he may give you a shortened version of a curriculum, a VITA resume, to be able to give information about the individual. So you have, if you weren't on the hiring committee or the interview committee, you have enough information to say, okay, what's this person's background? And I don't know if you do that or not, Jeff, but basically it's enough information for you to make an informed decision. For teachers, that's right. So, but not for coaches, not for other people that don't have the same level of responsibility as a teacher or principal or a curriculum coordinator or that type of thing would be. And so that's where you are putting your trust in the superintendent, and he's done his homework in terms of bringing the best candidate forward that he thinks was going to bring value to the district.
So can I reiterate, just sort of like to make sure I understand? So we're trying to make informed, good decisions for the district, because that's our role when we vote. If we review the materials ahead of time, which presumably we all do, and we have a concern, the best practice would be to call the superintendent, have a conversation,
Yeah.
which is in line with our policy.
As well as the board chair, yeah. Yeah.
And sort of raise those concerns and either allay them or
That's
at least
right.
bring them forward.
Yeah.
And that way we know when we're not rubber stamping because we're making informed decisions, but we also are not, well, personnel's very touchy, but something that obviously wouldn't want to be in public, but even stopping the proceedings in public could be attention.
Does that make sense? And it does-
Yeah.
does that
I
fit?
think, yeah, because I think it's like if you have a list of 25 people and John Smith is on there and you have a situation with John Smith you want discussed. If you bring it to the meeting and you say, I would like an executive session to speak about one of these people, well, then it becomes obvious who the person is we're talking about when they're suddenly removed from the list, right? So the idea would be that you, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that we would bring it to Jeff ahead of time. Jeff would modify the list, so the list that would go out would not include John Smith.
Yeah.
And then we would have an executive session to discuss John Smith, and maybe we decide as a group that we're going to continue to hire Jeff Smith, so the next meeting, Jeff Smith would be on that list.
And one of the other pieces about that is, having the name removed from the list. I mean, Jeff would then have the responsibility, I would think, to be able to call, Jeff
Mhm.
Smith, say, the intent was for your name to be on there to go forward. But, there's some questions and, it
Mhm.
may work out fine, we hope that it does, but we want to have that resolved and not bring that forward at the meeting.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Because that was one of those things where I was like, I
No.
read the list,
Yeah.
I don't recognize it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's very similar to when you craft the agenda. Do you do a consent agenda as well at the beginning of the list? Have you ever used a consent agenda? Where you might have certain things that everybody, like the minutes, like certain reports that might be included on a consent agenda.
We still vote on them.
Yes, but
Yes.
you could vote on them as a block.
Oh, yes, we do, yes, we do bundle them and vote,
Yeah,
yes,
so that's what I call a consent agenda.
yeah.
If one of you had an item on the consent, and maybe you do this, if you have an item on the consent agenda that someone has a question about, you just automatically pull that out.
Right,
You have that
yeah.
voted upon separately, right?
Right, because the expectation is that everyone's read it
Yes.
coming into the meeting, and so
Yeah.
if they had questions, yeah, we would separate it
So
out.
that's the same kind of concept as, the person's name on the list, except if it's a person's name because it's dealing with personnel. You do that up front, you do that ahead of time, so it doesn't actually happen at the meeting.
In that same vein, so, I mean, we don't obviously want somebody calling Shannon or Jeff 10 minutes before a meeting
Correct.
and saying that. So what's a reasonable lead time? Like, is that something that we just establish as a board? Like, it needs to be the day before?
I would say at least 24 hours beforehand. Now, the other part of that, in terms of, do you do revised agendas or do you do adjustment?
Yeah, I mean, that can happen time to time.
Yeah, and you don't want to have that happen either too often or
Right.
not give enough notice to people that, this is a revised agenda, so. What night of the week do you normally meet? Is it Thursdays? So I'd say at least by Tuesday. Yeah,
Okay.
so he needs to have time to be able to, number one, adjust the agenda, number two, be able to speak with an individual if indeed that, situation might happen.
And that individual is allowed to come to the executive session as well.
Well, not
Right, and-
necessarily, because I mean, coaching positions are one-year appointments.
Mhm.
And so as soon as the season is over, their responsibilities ended. So they're not being discharged, they're not being
Oh, I
disciplined.
see. Mhm.
So it's just that they aren't being hired yet.
Gotcha.
I mean, it may be a continuation of a position, previously, but if they were coached the year before, their position doesn't start again until they're hired for the next season. Right?
And
Thank you.
very easy to reach unless you're one of my teenagers asking for something.
Okay, this next slide kind of goes back to where we were before in terms of who do you represent, and I'd like to use this slide because it helps give some language to. And it also represents that you are here to listen to the folks in your community, and I do want to make sure that even though we looked very carefully at that letter by the Assistant Attorney General, this is really important. You know, board members who view their role as ensuring the views, beliefs, values, and self-interest of the constituents they know are the best on the table as part of the conversation you're representative of. So you are a representative of your community. And you do pay attention to what people say to you. However, they voice the interests and opinions of the know best, and then they vote on behalf of the best overall interests of the organization. And that's where the interests of the students come in. That's the best interest of the students as well as the best interest of the organization. So that's where that filter is, and that's where you really have to say, you know, in your decision making, you know, what do I really think is in the best interest of students? And how's it going to impact the community? But you know, I'm thinking, what's in the best interest of kids? So that's where, you know, sometimes it's maybe hard to sleep. I don't know. You know, sometimes it's, you know, there's some, you know, moral judgments that you make about that.
Yeah, and I think what's challenging sometimes too is the feedback that you'll get from, you know, other parents in the community. Oftentimes is based on their experience with their child, right? And so this is how the school is impacting my child, which is really important feedback, and we need to listen and be responsive to, and just like as a teacher would, or as a principal or administrator. But it also, you know, you're I think that's the rub, right? Because you're representing the interests of the school district, the organization, and all of the students, right?
Well, I think
that's tricky.
we've, as a town, made a very big effort to be transparent and to be very available and very open. Our phone numbers are out for anybody who wants to call us. And I value that very much. But at the same time, it is hard because then we also are active members of the community. Everybody here has kids. It's, you know, John has lived here his whole life. Like, there are very developed relationships that people have. And so there's this, it's kind of like being firm in that line, and it's difficult to,
Yes,
you know,
it is.
it's difficult.
Yeah.
You know, these are your friends, but this is our role as well. And so it's,
So that's
you
where
know, you
your
have to
role
balance it.
is unique, and it is different than being a select person or a city councilor. It's different than being a legislature. It's being, you know, different than being a senator, you know, within the House, within the Augusta body. Now, some of the things that help guide you, and this is your handout number 8. If you just take a look at, this is your code of ethics in Scarborough. Again, adopted in 2002, but I mean, it's lived since then. It looks like it hasn't been revised since then. So, you know, really, this was felt important back then, and 20 years later, 22 years later, I mean, it's still important. These are things that if you kind of think about this as your job description, I'll go back a little bit and say policies we really view as the owner's manual, because the policies are really, really important. If you ever have a question that comes up, you know, you'd say first, okay, what does their policy say? What does the statute say? And then, you know, get an interpretation from the superintendent. And if the superintendent has a question, you know, he's on the phone to your school attorney, you know, to be able to help, you know, with interpretation of something. So that's where policies are really, really important. They really have been established over time to help develop the foundation for how your school operates. And you make adjustments to them all the time in terms of certain policies that are either raised by interest of different statutes, or changes to certain policies that need to be put in place. But this particular one, policy BCA, is your board member code of ethics. And many of these read as I will statements, but yours has totally categorized this as each board member will view service on the board as an opportunity to serve the community, state, and nation. At all times, think of children first and base decisions on how they will affect children, their education and training. So there's another effort by the policy to say, okay, kids are what you think about first. And then a number of other comments that really speak to how you work together as a group. These aren't really norms, but they're really more in terms of if you're acting ethically as a board member, these are things you'd think about making sure you try to do as a board member. And some boards during their summer retreats, when they have them, they'll take these out, especially for new board members and just for other board members to continue to refresh. Okay, well, what did we say we were going to do? How were we going to do it? And so, you know, the code of ethics really can kind of help reframe that with regard to your vision, your mission, and how you want to function as a board. So that's really, really important too. I would like to go to slide your handout number 11, and Jeff, we can go forward to the slide on email. That's it, yeah. So you've got a policy BEA, and this is really consistent with other boards across the state as well. And this goes to some of your other questions before. Use of email is guided by the Freedom of Access Act. And that's a different statute. It's not in 20A, but it's in Title I. And it's actually it's chapter 13, and it's sections 401 through 408, I believe, for the Freedom of Access Act. And it really identifies that, if you look at letter A, school board won't use email as a substitute for deliberations at board meetings or for other communications or business properly confined to board meetings, or in any way to defeat the purpose of the Freedom of Access Act. In the statute itself, it talks about email to a broad group of folks within an organization or an agency can be used for non-substantive information. Non-substantive information would be trying to set a date for a meeting. Would be notification from the superintendent of certain things have been either canceled or postponed, or some other informational thing that doesn't need a response from you. A violation of this would be for any one of you as a board member to raise a substantive question about what do you think about item number 2 on the agenda, and email that to everybody and expect a response back from everybody. So in essence, you're having a conversation via email about something that should be talked about and decided at the board meeting. So a reply all process is not a good idea. The only time you could do that I would say you would do a reply all if Jeff said, can you meet on Thursday, the 18th, you know, for a special board meeting? And, you know, you'd say yes back, you know, without anything else included. So it needs to be non-substantive information that's being shared where you can, and even that is followable, meaning that, you know, someone can request records from those emails in terms of, you know, what was talked about, what's the content of those emails that are being shared, you know, amongst members of the board. And that's the biggest thing right now. And I don't know how many, I know that some of your neighbors have been fraught with hundreds of FOA requests, you know, fairly close by. But others, maybe you've not, but you know, people are really anxious to find out our boards observing and as a superintendent observing your proper responsibility in terms of how you're conducting meetings. So that also is something that would constitute a meeting. So, I mean, if you were to share information broadly and expect responses back, that would, you know, be considered constituting meeting. It would be a violation of the Freedom of Access Act. So
It's more based on the substance of the content on the email as opposed to it's 3 board members.
That's
Versus
a
two,
different,
or
that's a
is it-
different conversation.
Okay.
Okay, right now, we're talking about the content, you know, within the email itself, and what's the email string, and that type of thing. There's another part of this policy, though, that's two more pieces that are important. One is that anything that you send or receive that has to do with board business, whether it's on your personal phone, through your personal email or through your school email, even though I know it says here that board members will use their school email accounts for all board related business. There may be some people, members of the public, who may contact you through your personal email because they know you and indicate to you that they want to share some information about school business. That still is fallable in terms of being requested because it has to do with school business and you're a school board member. So that would be true for email, for text, for any other means of social media. So I would just caution you to be, careful in terms of what you share as board members, through those means of social media. And there are a couple of other handouts right after handout 11 that speak to things about school boards in the digital age, do's and don'ts for school leaders' use of electronic mail, media. And then there's another one from the New York School Boards Association, School Media Reference Board, member guide, FAQs for social media. So those are some good things to think about. And a final policy that, let's see, is, yes, Scarborough's board member use of social media policy that you have. That's another good one for you to just make sure you know and remember to utilize. The other thing that I would make sure you are very careful of, that you avoid reference to confidential information about employees, students, or other matters in email communications. Keep out of your subject tab, as well as your body of your email, staff member names, student names, so all that information is not included within your email string. If you have something that important to talk about, pick up the phone and make a call to whoever it is you want to speak to, or see the person in public, so you can have a face-to-face conversation and not leave a paper trail with regard to that particular communication. That makes sense. Okay, now to go to Carolyn's question before about, what constitutes a meeting in terms of 3 people together. The Freedom of Access Act also talks about, 3 people or more together, can constitute a meeting. Now, the important part of that is you have to make sure that 3 people together aren't, and if you're school board members, that you're not giving the appearance that you're conducting school business. So the 3 of you could go to a concert, and sit together. But if people, saw you talking about the basketball coach, and you were trying to make a decision. Now, 4 is a quorum here, right? Because you got 7 board members. Okay, so 4 people together, you could make a decision, if you were someplace and it was determined that the 4 of you were talking about school business and you were plotting in terms of what your decision was going to be, when you got to the next school board meeting. That's something that you shouldn't be doing. Your board business should be talked about, when you're here as board members, at a board meeting. Superintendent is going to be giving you information so that you can be informed, for you to be able to come to a board meeting and be able to ask questions and then, talk about whatever it is that's there, and then be able to, to make your motion, make your second, and take your vote after you've had your discussion. But those kinds of things should be done in a board meeting. Now, I also know you have committees, right?
Yeah.
And are there 3 or more on a committee, or two on a committee?
It's 3.
Okay, so there you've got, 3 on a committee, but you're not a quorum. So you still can, conduct the business of the committee. And even there, that committee isn't conducting business for the board. You're really doing the homework for the board so that you can make recommendations to the full board when you come to the meeting, to be able to then decide and discuss, what their recommendation is. So that's really how, committees should work with regard to being kind of advisory and making recommendations to the full board, both in terms of the recommendation as well as the conversation to be had prior to taking a vote, by the full committee. Shannon.
Well, I think, I feel like I know where Carolyn's getting at, so I'm gonna try to, I don't wanna put words in your mouth, I'm gonna
Okay.
try to like say an example. So if we have, 3 people that serve on a committee, for the board, and they are doing specific work that somebody in the community wants to speak to them about. And they email the community, they email the committee, not the community. The three members. So the 4 other board members over here may or may not be privy to this email, right? So 3 have it, 4 don't. We have board operating protocols that say I would respond on behalf of the board. So if an email comes in this way, how is it to be handled?
So let's say a community member raises a question to the chair of the policy committee and emails the chair of the, all your emails are out there, your phone numbers are out. They get a question. I would suggest that the chair of the policy committee then emails you two, the chair of the board as well as the superintendent, said this question has come in. And not to have the person, the chair respond, but then have the question come to the 2 of you and decide, okay, what do we do? What do we do with this question? And so, and then the other part of that is that you then would inform the other 3 board
Everybody
members
else.
that didn't receive the email to let them know this is information that has come in without initiating any conversation among all board members. Because if this is something that needs to come up at a board meeting or that you need to give information back to the policy chair, either you or the superintendent give back to the policy chair in terms of response to the person with a question. Now that creates all kinds of extra communication, but at the same time, it informs the other people in terms of what the question was, informs the 2 of you in terms of what's the level of importance or significance of the question and how do you respond. So I think it's real important in many committees, many full school boards that raise the question of how do you all have the same level of information,
Right.
without one group just having that information. Now, that's a little bit different than you as a school board. Let's say you have a facilities committee and you charge the facilities committee with explore the facilities, let's say it's facilities and transportation, with finding the best recommendation that they can for busing, for purchasing of school buses. And so you've tasked them with researching that. And so they may be looking for information and they may be doing that work singly as a committee before they bring their recommendation back to you as a full board. So I think there are differences there a little bit in terms of, but I do think that it relies upon the 2 of you with the communication received by a subcommittee of determining, okay, where does this information need to go? And it's not like all information is everybody to everyone all the time, because you'd be in an information flood all the time. There is a little bit level of both priority as well as significance in terms of who and how does this information need to be shared. Does that help or does it make it more muddy?
It does, and I'll just say I apologize, I bungled it. I know that's not what you're looking for. I'm like,
I did that really bad. Not at all.
The other part of this, and please. Learning to be a board member, if you've done it 1 year, you know 1 cycle of what it means to be a board member. If you do it 2 years, you know what 2 years look like, but every year is different. And there are new things that come up all the time, both for board members as well as superintendents. There was no superintendent that had ever been through COVID-19
Right.
before. And so we were learning things on the fly. School board members continue to learn things on the fly. And so you rely upon each other to be able to ask questions, to be able to then formulate what your best response is together as a team. And that's why the chair serves as your spokesperson along with the superintendent in terms of how information gets communicated to the community. But you're trying to do this together as a team.
I have a question if we can go backwards. Something that you said, I'm trying to figure out because I like bright lines when they're available. And this is an area where there's not that many bright lines as far as I'm concerned. So I'm trying to pull apart the distinction between, we have to conduct board business in public. That's a law,
Mhm.
but it's also really important policy this board has
Right.
endorsed over and over again, including this year. And yet we're not supposed to have discussions kind of offline with, 3 or more people. I think it's sort of a problem, but then we have 3 people on a committee doing board business, discussing things that are outside of board. So I'm feeling like I need a little more clarity about how to draw that distinction. So I understand board business in public. I understand a little bit of BOA because I do some of that. So I understand, but how do we conduct board business as a committee, having substantive discussions about board business? Kind of delegate it to the committee, and that's not in violation of the principle that we're meeting. Does that make sense?
It does. And if you're a committee of 5, that number of 3 would be a problem. Where your number of 7, board of 7, if you had a 4th person there who was a member of the committee, then you'd be able to make decisions for the committee within that, for the full committee within that subcommittee. And you're not doing that. Plus, you've been charged by the full board and given a task to perform as that standing committee. And so you don't have the authority nor the votes to be able to say, well, we're making the decision, for the committee. You're basically doing the homework to be able to then report out. So your 3 in this particular instance is fine.
So we're collecting information, delegated authority for the board, for the committee work, and then bringing it back to the board. So that's not a
Form or
violation.
make recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand the process and I understand that it's okay, but I was just really trying to figure out.
Yeah, and I think I have
Yeah.
a good example for you. So I was interested in something specific that the finance committee was going to discuss. Well, the finance committee is Freyla, Carolyn, Jenna, right? I am the 4th unofficial member when somebody cannot participate,
You're-
right? Because
you're-
as a chair, I'm
Ex officio, you're a member of any
of all of
committee.
them. But when I go to when I wanted to hear in person about this particular issue, I really kind of went as a community member. Because the 3 of them, the 3 of you were there, right? So in that instance, I wasn't there as Shannon Lindstrom board chair. I was there as Shannon Lindstrom, resident of Scarborough, listening to the 3 of you conduct a meeting. Does that help a
Completely
little
makes
bit?
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that means where I got hung up was this sort of like, you're not like this, like, you're not supposed to conduct business outside of, supposed to have substantive like the content. And then all of a sudden we start talking to committees and I'm like, well, that's all content. But I'm understanding that. So as long as that makes sense. Thank you.
Can I ask so this was new when I first came on in November. I did not expect to see 2 students as being representatives on the board. So what did they play in some of this discussion? Because for instance, on the curriculum committee, there are 3 of us and then there's a student as well. So that makes it 4, but I guess I just haven't quite understood what their role is.
It's different because in terms of the actual votes that count.
Okay,
And
I know, that's why I'm like.
Yeah. They're here, they're very important. It's important for them to have a voice as typically a junior and a senior.
Yes.
So their voice is really important, but in terms of your legal voting business, theirs don't count.
Okay.
But in terms of their opinion, absolutely. And, that's where, their voice is really important on the committee as well as on the full board, when you're together, you're discussing things.
And is that common in the state to have
Not
students?
totally common, but I see more that are doing that.
I mean, I like that they're involved. I just never, like, sometimes we ask for, I don't know that we necessarily are like, hey, what's your vote? But they do raise their hand
Yeah, they
sometimes, so
do.
I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
where, like, what's,
But theirs
Does-
is like a non-binding vote, right? Like
That's
that's a good way to say
Okay.
it. That's,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so they're significant because
Okay.
they are literally living
yeah,
under all of our guidelines and
Yes.
policies.
Right,
And
right.
their input is really important for all of us, including Jeff,
Mhm.
to know what's working. What's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
So a piece that I do see different across different boards is some have student representatives come and they just give a report. other boards include them in the discussion. So if there's an issue that is significantly affects, students, that their opinion would be requested. And that's where Robert's rules can come in, where the role of the chair can, be important in terms of all voices around the table, being heard as part of the conversation. John?
So let's say we have a, we have a vote and we are split, let's say 4 or 3 against, and those 2 are against, they would make it 5-4. They wouldn't,
No.
but we would count that. So how would we, in a meeting, how would that look? Because we count the votes and we say unanimous or whatever, it's.
Well,
this or
I
that.
say unanimous. When I'm saying unanimous, I'm saying the 7 of us.
Okay, so you.
Yeah,
okay,
I
so
don't-
there, They would,
So,
Yeah.
but I mean, like. if-
But that would look
If
just-
4 of us voted for something, plus the 2 of them, you usually say like, or somebody usually says 4 + 2 or whatever.
Yeah, well, I would, yeah, because you call, if it's not unanimous, you call for the, all in favor, and then when I see it's not, then I would say,
But I'm just curious
yeah.
how that would look for us, because that would be odd.
yeah. Yeah, it would be an awkward situation, right? What if we were all voting yes and they voted no, right? And they didn't raise their hands.
And then you're like, it's unanimous.
Yeah, and then I just have to say
Yeah,
it's
like,
unanimous. Right, and it's weird, right? To your point, it would be totally awkward, yeah,
Removal of all grades.
yeah.
Everybody gets a 4 point.
Yeah, and they do, like, I think it's great that our student reps bring forward, some of it's, we kind of chuckle about, like, some of the things they bring forward, but they act as real voices, right, for the rest of the school.
No, they come with, real life experiences.
Yeah,
from the schools
yeah.
And tell stories, and it's important, I think, for us to get their input and their point of views
Yeah,
and what they experience. I mean,
absolutely.
because it's a whole lot different from 1986 when I was a junior
Yeah,
in Scotland High School than it is today.
Right. Yeah.
So those are kind of the 2 issues. One was use of email, and the
Mhm.
other one was, what constitutes a meeting. Did we cover those well enough for folks to get a handle? Okay. There are 2 things in here that I just think I'd like to have you make sure that they're in here, and they're sections 15 and 16 of your packet. One has to do with records that are designated confidential under Maine law. And so certain things that might be requested by folks. Jeff is going to be the keeper of this and also the determiner of what can be revealed or what can be talked about in public session versus executive session. And then section 16 are the reasons legally that you can go into executive session. There are only certain times that you can go in. It has to be by a 3/5 majority. You do not need a vote to come out of executive session. You just come out, return to the public session. And then if there's any vote necessary after executive session, you take it in public session after the executive session finishes.
So one thing I think we do differently from the town that I've noticed, is there are times we will go into an executive session not to return to public session.
Mhm.
And so we go ahead and adjourn the meeting right then. And I think it's different. I think what I've noticed is it's different at town council. They will come back.
Well,
All the
I would
time.
recommend that you come back because you should adjourn the meeting in public session.
So we shouldn't, because what we do is we adjourn it after we say we're going into executive session, according to blah, 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 we give the whole thing, the whole citation, not to return to public session. We vote on it and then we adjourn then. But that's like, what I think I hear you saying is we shouldn't do it that way.
Because otherwise you'd be adjourning within executive session, so you really never adjourn the meeting.
Right.
You can't you aren't supposed to, there's no legal vote within executive session.
Right.
So what you could say is we're going into executive session and we'll be returning to public session, but there'll be no further business after executive session.
Okay.
And then come out, quickly adjourn and get the time that you adjourn, because you ought to do a time in, time out for
Mhm.
your executive session in terms of identifying, okay, when you went in, what the vote was, and then, when you come out. And then do a quick adjournment, for the meeting afterwards.
So that, does that get like, I could think of one time where we had an executive session that wasn't encapsulated in a board meeting. Do we have to come here, open, okay.
Yeah, and,
We do
and
that.
any meeting, anytime you have an executive session, you still have to open a publicly, officially posted meeting, first. Enter into public session, then do the motion to go into executive session. Do whatever conversation you're doing in executive session, come out. If you have a vote afterwards, you take the vote of whatever the item was that you're discussing in executive session, and then another motion to adjourn. Or you can, without objection, adjourn. But you should adjourn from public session, not from executive session.
Thank you.
We have a few meetings that we need to wrap.
They're still going on.
Right, ongoing.
So there are a few policies that I wanted to just make sure not for us to talk about tonight, but and maybe you've already talked about them within your board meeting, I'm not sure. I would have you take a look at your policy. It's handout number 18. Public participation at board meetings. And I'm just looking at the date, April 28 of 2022, which is the last time this was revised. Drummond Woodson has worked with us, Maine School Management Association, and we revised a policy as recently as March of 2023. That's one on our website. However, I've spoken with Peter Femley yesterday, and we'll be looking at one more revision to that speaks about public participation at board meetings to be viewpoint neutral. And this is a little bit of a different type of a concept at board meetings where people in the public, they can come and speak to education and school matters, but they are not to come and speak disparagingly about school personnel. However, there's also another component of that based on some current court cases where you also need to be specific about during public participation that positive aspects about staff also are not said within that public participation comment period. So that the viewpoint neutral is important in terms of, you can't say, I can't come and talk negatively about, staff. You also can't come and speak positively about staff. And that's based on our ruling back in December of 2022, as well as it's also going to be more than likely supported by a court case currently going on in Hamden, where that basic premise has been challenged as well.
But that's just during public comment.
During public comment period.
So our spotlight awards, those are.
But having like recognition.
That's
a
fine.
separate
Okay.
That's a separate agenda item, and that's coming from you, that's coming
Yes.
from the board, that's coming from.
But we have
So you-
public come up and talk if somebody's nominated.
Yeah, but that's
What if-
okay. It's not public comment.
Because it's an
It's not
agenda
public
item,
comment.
right?
Agenda
So then it
item,
would be
it's not public
okay.
comment. And then with public comment, like we've been very fortunate here with our public comment being fairly appropriate. So I know that some have experienced not as
Mhm.
appropriate commentary. As long as it's content neutral, you can have rules of order, so you can limit 3 minutes per
Mhm.
speaker, you can do all
Mhm.
that. And if somebody violates the policy, our policy, which apparently is gonna be revised at some point relatively soon. We can hold people accountable to this policy. So we can
Absolutely.
give them a warning that they can't, let's say they're using abusive, vulgar language, the violation of policy. So if they did that, we could give them a warning and then we could terminate their ability to comment that day.
That's
only because of their abuse of the policy, but they do go and come back next time.
That's correct.
That's in keeping with Mike law, right?
That's
the
correct.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
Not that we want to use that, but if we
Correct.
need it, we want to know how to do it.
Well, yeah, we did have,
Now first.
Not in.
yeah, and there's been, yeah. Yeah, there,
Can,
yes.
when, just whenever we revise hours, Can we at least get it up on like the main page, like where our meetings are, and like have this one out there for like, if you want to make public comment, please read these guidelines
Oh.
first.
Do you want it, do you want it like in our agenda, like hyperlinked, or do you want a separate document that we can be
I
referred
think
to?
there should be a separate document online where we put our agenda
Yeah.
and our meeting, like everything
It's
for the
attached to
day,
every agenda.
for every time we
So
meet.
attached to the agenda?
Yes.
That's a great idea.
Or, and just even like a hot button that says like, public,
love
you wanna
buttons.
make
Yeah, I was gonna say,
public
because
comment.
people are gonna
the
need an education on
guidelines
that.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah,
You could actually do both. You could hyperlink it in the agenda to the document, and then you could have the document appended to the agenda in both. Like,
Right, because obviously we can't control what people actually say, but if we put it out there, like this is, it's blatant for you to see.
Right, so then when I have to
Then we
say,
can't hold
you
it
know,
accountable.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that we have to stop this, that
Right.
everybody
Let's say
knows.
somebody comes in and says, that we're infringing upon their freedom of speech.
This is it's a limited public forum, and that's the overview of the First Amendment rights they have. It's not like they can come in and say anything they want. They've been given a right through the law to be able to speak about education and public matters. I mean, that's part of the statute. But because it is a limited public forum, you can control those three things that we talked about, you know, time, content, as well as manner in which they're speaking.
gotta be
And
viewpoint
that's
neutral.
supported by the
Gotta be
law.
viewpoint neutral. That's the key.
That's right.
Yeah.
Viewpoint neutral, not
Viewpoint.
content
No,
neutral.
not
Yeah.
content neutral, viewpoint.
Viewpoint, yeah.
So we can't say only those.
So if, I'm sorry, I was writing my note down for this. So if somebody comes in and says, the example John gave, you would say that that's. What did you say? Would you mind repeating yourself? I'm so sad.
We can, well, this is.
Oh, yeah, I guess I could go back and watch. Yes. I'll go back and watch. Yes.
Limited public forum.
Yeah. Thank you.
Only the world's most okayest teacher award. Can't go positive, can't go negative. Just gonna stay
Stay right there.
right in the middle.
So like,
T-shirts.
we, you know, random things happen all the time. We get, you know, in one particular, not our meeting, but another meeting, audience members are like yelling to the
body.
the body, thank you. What,
It's
I
happened in our
mean,
meetings too, so.
what?
So it's happened in our meetings too, so.
Well, but if, do you just like adjourn if we can't?
You can recess, you
Okay.
can, and if you can't get the meeting back to order, because the other part, and this is an important part for you as board members, school board meetings are very important for you to be able to conduct your business. You've got an intentional agenda that's a lot of thoughts gone into in terms of what's important for you to do. So school board meetings are meetings of the board to do your business, to do the business of the board in the public, for the public, but not of the public. So they can't just be out there, you know, and interrupting, you know, your ability to do business. So if they're being disruptive, then, and if you can't get them back under control, then yes, you can recess, and then come back, you know, when it seems like it's time during the same night, you know, to be able to continue your meeting. That's
Okay.
certainly
I
legit.
need a public comment slide every time you.
Yeah,
Oh, that's a great idea.
that's a great idea.
So it's always a.
Some boards, if they feel needed, they actually review their policy, public participation policy before public comment period starts.
And probably periodically.
Yes.
throughout.
Yeah.
So, I guess, and I know we only have a couple minutes, but I'm thinking of an email that we had in the past where there was, so it was an email, but I can imagine, I guess, an email, because it's not public, I guess it,
Oh, it is.
well, it is, but we can't limit what they're saying in an email to us, and we do need to know what's happening within the district. So I guess my question is, how are people, if there's something, I remember we had something where there was at least one parent that was concerned about a coach in the district. And they had emailed this to us and the athletic director and superintendent, and then we figured out who was going to deal with it. How should that go about? Like, they just can't show up at public comment and say, hey, I'd like you to look into this about this particular.
Not if they're
Coach.
talking about an individual. Because you can't allow them to be speaking out personnel, from the podium, in terms of. a public-
So privately or
Yes.
semi-privately through an email, they can.
Or
I mean,
phone call
a
or,
phone call.
personal conversation or something.
Okay, because I can imagine somebody saying something like that up here, being,
Yeah.
well, when am I supposed to have this brought to, the attention?
That's right.
Okay,
And you do have a policy that does relate to that, and it's policy KEB, which is your concerns and complaints about, personnel. And so there's a chain of command process, that is done, for those types of situations. And so I recommend that they would use that. Real quickly, and I would just ask you to take a look at the policies that are in the back. They're handouts number 22, 23, and 24. And we don't have time to even reference them tonight, but actually they're 22 through 26. And I just, it's IJJ, Jeff, it's the selection of all materials and that type of thing. And whether it be done at the policy meeting level or, broadly here, just make sure that they're where you want them to be.
They were recently answered, but I will.
Good. Okay. So much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
yes, thank
This
you.
has been wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you
for
very
coming. I found this very helpful. Always, I
Yes.
always feel like I learn new things. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Learn something new every time.
Very pleased to be here. These are for you.
Actually, it's my-
Oh,
Your
beautiful.
first moment.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, most-
Nice.
Okay. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want us to give these to you right now?
Okay, have that, sure. I didn't even mention that, Shannon, so,
I just happened to see it.
okay.
Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, May 18th, 2023 Scarborough Board of Education meeting. Jeff, could you call the attendance, please?
Yes, Mrs. Lindstrom,
Here.
Ms. Gammon,
Here.
Mr. Kelleher,
Here.
Ms. Leong.
Here.
Mr. Marino,
Here.
Ms. Tarpinian,
Here.
Ms. Tarpini Huff,
Here.
Ms. Bertulia,
She's been excused.
oh, and Mr. Shumway.
Here.
Perfect. Would everybody please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Perfect, thank you. Agenda item 4.0 are adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments this evening?
No adjustments this evening.
Correct. Agenda item 5.0 are public comment on agenda items. If there's anybody wishing to make public comment, please come to the podium. Is there anybody online? All right, seeing no public comment, I will go ahead and close. Agenda item 6.0 is new business. 6.1 is the second reading of the FY 24 school budget. So first, do I have a motion to approve the FY? Oh, pardon me. I got excited. I was ahead of myself. I'm sorry. We never miss an opportunity to hear from you, Kate.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Bolton. I talk about the budget every day. I'm sorry. I should have said that there were some slides in the deck about this because we haven't heard enough about it yet. Shannon's ready to take the vote. I'm excited. I'm excited too. Awesome. So you guys aren't really going to be shocked or surprised by any of these slides because there's a lot of the same material going on here. This is the slide that tells the public that there's a ton of information out there on the FY24 budget. We're going to go real quick through this because we've been here a few times before. So I just want this to be out there for the public. If they're looking at this meeting, they can click on that live link and get a ton of information about the budget. We'll also have new slides or new documents up there after the second reading vote to update all the material that's there now. Next slide, sir. All right, so this is a picture of the budget that the school board passed for first reading on March 16th. And it shows the general fund, adult ed, and school nutrition operating budgets. It shows gross budget, which is total expenditures, non-tax revenues, and the tax request, which we also call the net budget. And at that time, we were at a 7.28% ask of the town in taxes. We talk a lot about items in motion. Between first and second reading, a lot of things happen. There's quite a few weeks between our first and second reading, and that's deliberate because we want time to go through the budget. We want time to refine our estimates. And there are some items that we don't know about that are driven by outside forces that are going to impact our budget for next year. And we want to wait until we receive that information, those confirmations, so that we can nail down our projections. This slide talks about some of those changes. And there's a handout. Everybody's reading my handout. Oh my gosh. This is great. I'm a paper person, so there's a handout that is actually linked into the next, I think it's the next slide, for those of you who do not want my paper, that describes in great detail all of the changes that we've made to the budget since the first reading happened. Jeff, if you pop back one sec, I'm just going to note that the changes that we've made since our first reading have resulted in a net change, a reduction in our operating expenditures in those three funds of $567,000. So that's a good thing. We're moving downward from our original estimate. We did add in to our budget proposal for tonight shared services reimbursement costs, and we've talked about that during our budget presentations. These are costs that are actually in the town budget, and we are still waiting for acknowledgement that those are going to be approved by the town, but we're going to include them in our second reading, and then we can make a further adjustment if they do not end up in the town's budget or if they end up at a different amount. On this slide also, we talk a little bit about non-tax revenues. We got a big boost in our state subsidy, general purpose aid, on March 28th. So the town has figured that into their calculations, and we've known about it for a while. We unfortunately got another reduction in our state subsidy a month later, but our net gain since our first reading in state tax revenue or state subsidy revenues is over $1 million. So that's really awesome as well. And the last bullet on here is non-tax revenues for adult education. We had posted $20,000 of use of fund balance from prior years in the adult education budget as non-tax revenues. And we've increased that by $10,000 because we now have the final numbers from FY22, and there's actually more in that fund balance that we can use. So that's a little gain as well. The detailed process worksheet, which everybody has in front of them, these candy colored sheets, is linked into this slide. So slide 39 for y'all who are taking notes. This is what the school budget operating funds look like now at second reading. So the reductions in expenditures impact that total education budget line, the third from the bottom, so that our budget increase on expenditures is now 5.78%. Non-tax revenues are increased because of that subsidy. And the tax request is now decreased from that rather ugly 7.28% number that we saw a few slides ago down to a much nicer 4.42% increase on our request to the town for taxes. On the capital budget, we had originally included a figure of $137,500,000 in our capital budget for the Unified Primary School Building Project, which we've all spent a lot of time talking about. And my expectation was that we would change that number for second reading and that it would be going up quite a bit based on some of the conversations we'd been having. And actually, based on the business case that was shared last night by Harriman and the Building Steering Committee, that number actually works. It still works. It's still within just a few $100,000 of the estimate of the total construction cost, as well as a fairly rough estimate on the land purchase. So we've decided to keep that same figure in here for second reading. And, we've told the town folks that that's what we're going to do. And we can, of course, adjust that amount in the future if we need to. But I think it's an excellent number to use for this evening. So our capital budget, we have capital equipment, we have capital projects, we have the building project, which is a nice big line all by itself, total capital budget, and then the school capital non-tax revenues. That number refers to, for the most part, municipal bonding. We do have the ability to use some reserve funds, and it's really up to the town to some extent how we allocate funds within the town for capital projects. But the bottom line tax request, that $1 million, is what the town finance office has designated as appropriated or tax dollars to be used for those. And I think we will probably have some conversations about that. We can still talk about using some of our reserve funds if we want to. And the town is actually going to be taking up the capital budget. Their finance committee is going to be talking about it next week. And they're going to be making recommendations the week after that. So there may be some movement in terms of how we actually fund the capital budget, but in terms of what we approve tonight for spending, I think, this is the solid number there. Next steps. I have the Town Council Finance Committee's review and recommendations on May 31st here because that's a time when the town is actually going to, or the Finance Committee is actually going to give their recommendations for the overall municipal budget. And they're likely to make recommendations for changes here and there. And those changes will be brought to the full town council for their second reading on June 7th. So we're going to need to be responsive to that. If there's anything that needs to be changed, then we'll be having a school board meeting on June 8 after the vote, but we'll also have a lot more information on and after the 31st. And the biggest deal is the school budget validation referendum. You can vote now if you want to, provided you live in Scarborough. And you haven't voted already. Early voting has already begun, voting in person at Scarborough High School on June 27th. And that is also a live link in the slide to the town's website where you can get all kinds of information about early and absentee voting. I think that's it.
All right, are there any questions for Kate? Yeah.
Hi, Kate.
Hi.
Thank you so much for all this work. The tax request of that, our kind of final number, that 4.42 tax request. I just want to reiterate, that's not what we're asking for to increase people's property taxes by.
Oh, Freyla, thank you so much for asking that question. The school's request to the town for tax dollars has increased in this budget by 4.42%. You are absolutely correct. That does not mean that as a citizen property owner in Scarborough, that your taxes are going to go up 4.42%. So our budget is combined with the town budget, with the county, with the capital budget. There is a calculation of valuation increase across the town and an estimate overall of what the tax rate increase will be. Our ask of 4.42% equates to something like a 2% increase on the tax rate, but it's just our portion of the calculation. So, you know, we're doing our best to keep our ask at a reasonable increase, and we're hoping that that will help to achieve the 3% or less increase that is a town council goal for the town overall.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking that question.
Can I ask about the school nutrition, why that was decreased?
Why the amount was decreased?
The income, the revenue adjustment?
They're actually impacted by the Anthem rates as well. So Anthem came in at a lower rate, and so those folks also receive benefits, but those benefits are part of their part of that fund. So they're segregated within that fund. So as I reduce the amount that I need to raise for school nutrition's budget, I can also reduce the revenue that I expect to raise to cover that. So we go for a net zero on the revenue. If they actually raise more money than what the budget allows them to spend, then that would go to fund balance. So you wouldn't want to anticipate raising more money than what you need if you're trying to zero out the fund.
This isn't much of a question as much as it was asked actually earlier in our building finance committee. And so I think it's important to go back to this. You mentioned on the capital slide, the school building, that it did stay at the 137.5. And, you know, there's concern, or there has been concern expressed that we were going to get up to 150 or when the 140s or by the time you added the land in, because we have been consistently saying that price did not include the purchase of the land, right? The reason it's staying about where it's at, just so that the public understands, is because the work that Diane and Harriman and Jeff have been doing to kind of make space or figure out the space that's needed for the new school has actually reduced the square footage slightly. And so the price of the construction would have gone down, but then you put the price of the land back in, and now you're kind of at that same number. So in other words, we are moving forward with the 137.5. We don't feel that we need to move to the 150, 140, whatever. additional increase in price to accommodate the land because we have pardon? Oh, we have this new cushion, for lack of a better. Did I describe that well?
Yeah, and I think if people are interested in looking at the business case, is that out on the building project site? Or where would they look for the business case?
They would look on the business. Well, right now it lives on the town site because it's part of the packet, but we will be putting it on the building site
Right.
as well.
So there's a really cool analysis of, all kinds of cool things to do with the building project. And one of the pieces of that, when you get to the end of it, is an estimate of what the unified school and middle school renovation projects, the total cost is about 132 million. And so we're throwing in a $5 million chunk for land, and that is an estimate based on the current cost of commercial land in Scarborough, rough estimate of $200,000 an acre, 25 acres for the parcel that we're talking about acquiring for our school. So again, to Shannon's point, you put all those things together and you're still underneath that 137.5 million threshold. And so rather than adjust that in a small way and make it more confusing for the public, it's easier for us just to say 137.5. When we actually go to referendum, we're going to have a specific detailed expense, what's the word? A breakdown. Thank you. It was a late night last night, wasn't it? I haven't had enough coffee. So an expense breakdown that will show a much firmer estimate. And also at the time we go to referendum, we will have entered into an agreement for the land. And so we'll know the actual cost. So there's still a few things in motion, but I think the point Shannon's making is that original number actually works still, and it's in the right ballpark.
And now we can say it's all inclusive.
Right.
So we no longer have to say this price does not include the cost of the land. Now we can say this is an all encompassing cost.
Right.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding this correctly, our total cost of this building project, including everything, is actually coming down from what you're saying.
Yes.
Is that, am I understanding that correctly? Like, so the cost of this project is actually being reduced kind of in real time right now?
Yes.
Even though the number looks the same, what we're actually.
Now it's
asking-
including more.
It's including more, so the number's coming down.
Yes.
Right.
That's wonderful. news.
Yeah, it is wonderful news. And I think, it was a necessarily kind of a broad estimate because it was based on, and it's still to some extent a broad estimate because what Harriman is doing is basing it on a guess of what square footage we're going to need and an estimate of a cost per square foot. That's just the preliminary way that you estimate building construction right now. So what they're able to do now is they've been able, between now and that first estimate, they've been able to refine the square footage. And now they can actually go out to an estimator, a professional person who can put a specific price tag on each element of the project, rather than having it just be that ballpark per square foot cost. So it will become even more refined. And there may also be choices in that process as well, right? Like what's included, what's not included, what we can afford and what we choose not to.
And does that number include, like lockers and chairs and tables?
It does, yeah. It's we call it FF&E, furnishings, fixtures, and equipment. It does, yeah. It includes technology, which is a big number. It includes some soft costs like engineering and permitting, and it's really meant to be an all-inclusive number at this point. And again, we'll have that breakdown, so we'll be able to see where each element of that budget goes to.
All right, any other questions for Kate? All right, do I have a motion to approve the FY24 education budget as presented in the school board's first reading on March 16th, 2023?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
I move, is it okay to do?
Yes,
the
this
move?
is your time.
All right. Move approval to amend the FY '24 education budget approved at the school board's first reading on March 16th, 2023 as follows. General fund operating budget, reduce the expenditures budget by $406,201 as outlined in the supporting documents. Increase non-tax revenue by $1,071,844, additional state subsidy. Amend the general fund expenditure gross budget will total $62,060,019. Amended general fund non-tax revenues will total $7,792,838. Amended general fund net budget will total $54,267,181. The adult education budget, reduce the expenditure budget by $242 as outlined in the supporting documents. Increase non-tax revenue by $10,000. Additional use of fund balance. Amend adult education expenditures gross budget will total $183,149. Amended adult education non-tax revenues will total $120,738. Amended adult education net budget will total $62,411. The school nutrition budget, reduce the expenditure budget by $13,952 as outlined in the supporting documents. Reduce non-tax revenue by $13,957 to match expenditures. Amend school nutrition expenditures gross budget will total $2,313,735. Amended school nutrition non-tax revenues will total $2,313,735. Amended school nutrition net budget will total $0. Capital improvements budget, no recommended changes, stays as approved at first reading. So
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We are all here. So we, for now, we will vote on the amendment that Carolyn just offered. So. Oh,
Second.
Second. Thank you. So all in favor of,
Can I make
the,
a correction
oh,
on this?
yeah,
Just to make sure, because I think one digit was off on the school nutrition budget, reduce the expenditure budget by 13,957 as outlined in the supporting documents.
She said 13,952.
There's just a digit. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a second. So, and we're all here. So all in favor of, the amendment that Carolyn offered? Good. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to return to the main motion, which will now, which is now to accept the general fund operating adult education, school nutrition and capital budget as amended. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? Go ahead. Do you have a question? Okay. All in favor? All right.
I just thought I'd come back for a second and say that the public doesn't really need to memorize those numbers. We will post them.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah. It's not a test, no. It's, thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for your wonderful reading skills, Karen. Thank you for your wonderful reading skills. All right, agenda item 6.2 is a motion to approve the safe gun storage resolution. So I'm just going to tee this up and hand it off to Brian. So we, as you know, received some correspondence from constituents asking us to consider this, the safe storage resolution. And Brian has worked very closely with April Seither, Councilor Seither, from the town council. And so last night, the town council did approve their resolution, their safe storage resolution. And so I'm going to tee up for Brian to talk about ours in the process. Oh, you don't have to. Well, you can if you want. Yeah. No, did you want to add anything about it in the process?
I was just gonna add that, first off, aside from just the importance of the message that this sends to the community, This has been a really, I think there's a lot of meaning behind this in the sense of the fact that we're doing this as a community, the fact that we're doing this hand in hand with the council. And I really appreciated the work that Counselor Scyther has put forward as well. When we met and we kind of went through this, we spoke with the town manager, we spoke with superintendent, we tried to get everybody involved to have a say where they felt like it was necessary to help get this to the point of where it's at right now, where everybody was comfortable with it, but also, you know, to a place where we could get it before the end of the school year, because that was really our big driving force behind this, is that we'd like to get this message out into the hands of the public and to parents before the summer, when kids do have a lot of extra time, and, you know, we don't want issues around, you know, gun violence to happen. And if we can educate parents around safe storage, you know, now, no better time than right now.
Thank you. All right, do I have a motion to approve the safe gun storage resolution as presented?
So moved.
Second.
All right, is there any discussion?
I just want to reiterate that in 2020, firearm deaths became the leading cause of deaths of children under the age of 18 in this country, surpassing motor vehicle crashes. And shortly after that, the law changed, which is something near and dear to my heart. So I prosecute child abuse cases and endangering cases, and they changed the law so that endangering the welfare of the child now encompasses allowing a child under the age of 16 to access a gun if that gun is used to injure another person. And so I'm very, very happy to support this resolution, because I think it's extremely important and very, very important that we have safe gun handling of all firearms for our children's protection.
Thank you, Freeland.
I will second what Freyla has said. This is been a nationwide problem, and putting education out to people is always a good thing.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, and I will say the same. I think this is an opportunity where we can provide education in a nonpartisan way, non-political way. It is strictly information for people to know what to do and how to safely store their weapons or their firearms. And I like that we're doing this with town council, because I think that, you know, oftentimes we think of schools as an educational force, but also, you know, we have parents, we have grandparents in this, we have kids that visit their friends, their parents' friends. So there are other avenues besides the school where we get to reach people and provide this education. So thank you for your work. I know it wasn't easy. We really appreciate you representing us. So, all right. On that, if there are no other comment or discussion, all in favor of the safe gun storage resolution? And it's unanimous. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, agenda item 6.3 is the first reading of policy AC, the non-discrimination, equal opportunity and affirmative action policy. I'll turn this to Freeland.
Sure, let me grab my note. So the policy committee has been hard at work churning out policies, so we'll continue. We have a lot on our agenda and we're ambitious. So so this policy is just pretty straightforward. The AC is the non-discrimination, equal opportunity and affirmative action policy. It's completely a policy that is required by law. It just says that we're going to follow the law. When we were reviewing other policies, we bumped into it because it was referenced in a policy, and we noted that the definition that's included in this policy did not include all of the protected groups that are covered by the Maine Human Rights Commission. And so we amended the language in that definition at the very top page in order to encompass all of the protected classes. It just brings us in compliance with the law. And so that was the change that we recommended in that policy. Again, in your materials, all the policies have the writing, and the amendments are either strike throughs for language that we've eliminated or chose not to put forward. And the red are the changes that we've amended. So if we add anything, it's in red. If we strike any language out, it's just a strike through. So if you've had ability to review that, that was what we are recommended with that in regards to that policy.
All right, so do I have a motion to approve the first reading of policy AC, the non-discrimination, equal opportunity and affirmative action?
So moved.
Second.
All right, is there any discussion? All right, all in favor? And it is unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 6.4 is the first reading of policy JIC, Student Code of Conduct.
The policy committee reviewed this policy. We are going through, I've called it the J Suite. I don't know if that's a technical term, but all of our policies are done by alphabetical letters. And J is a whole bunch of policies that follow that. This is the Student Code of Conduct. It's a really important policy that guides a lot of the requirements for our students, and the recommended changes are very minor. We tightened up some of the language by changing language such as expected from kind of guidance to shalls or musts to make it clear. So the shoulds go to must, the expected should go to shall. And we made just some minor changes. Those are also in red. And again, made the language compliant. So when referencing the grooming and dress, we just reference the dress code because that's what the policy is called. Just try to simplify. Other than that, we didn't make any substantive changes to that policy. We did eliminate some, I'm looking at subsection E, we eliminated a whole bunch of lines, but all we did was we took out the definition that was in the definition above. So we took out some duplicative language to try to make it as easy as possible to read. We took out a reference to a specific substance when banning prohibited substances because we thought that we didn't need to single that particular substance out. All drugs that are illegal are not permitted on campus. And that's pretty much all we did in that subsection, or sorry, into that policy of JIC.
Okay, are there any questions for Brayla about this? So I think I found an error
Okay.
that I believe it is an overzealousness of the use of the strike through, which would be on this person. So if we look on page 3, letter E, since this is my job that I will probably lose in the policy committee after this meeting. If you look at letter E, it says students shall not discriminate or harass other students on the basis of, and I was supposed to strike through against other students. But I ended up striking out the whole sentence.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
we do.
So we've got to fix, we will, if you could note it, we'll fix it for the second meeting. So it should say students shall not discriminate or harass other students on the basis of race, color, sex. I shouldn't have stricken out the whole sentence. I should have just stricken out the one, a couple of words there. So it's not a change that would hold up this policy from going to second reading, because again, it's my overzealousness with the strike through.
I would also say that we should probably get it in line with the policy we just brought to first reading, which is AC, so we should probably take that definition, which is slightly changed, and bring that down,
Bring it
because
down.
that's where that language comes from.
Yeah.
So again, not substantive change, it's the same
Yeah.
subsection, but
Just fixing my strike throughs.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
I know social media has been a big issue
Mhm.
in schools, not just here, but like everywhere. Could that maybe kind of be included I don't know where, honestly, but just kind of bring attention to like respect even on social media, even though we might have policies around social media already.
Okay.
can I ask a clarifying question? So
Yes.
we've actually internally, I think in the policy committee, have had some suggestions around of having a
Yeah.
policy, adopting a policy on social media. You're not suggesting that. What you're saying is you want to reference in the student code of conduct that these rules would also apply to social media.
Correct.
Let's look to see where, I bet
Okay.
that could be worked in. I'll make a note to review that with the committee.
Yeah, and there was one, I don't think it was student code of conduct. I think it was there was another policy that we discussed where there is a sentence and it hasn't come yet, so you'll see it, but there's a sentence in there that specifically speaks to outside of school, which would cover online bullying. So that would be in there as well. I'm trying to remember where exactly, so I can point you exactly where it is.
I think if you look at under the code of conduct in this policy on page, it says, it applies to students on school property. Sorry.
Yes, there it is.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's bullet 3 under code of conduct on page 2. So at any time or place that such conduct directly interferes with the operations, discipline, or general welfare of the school. So in our policy meeting, we actually discussed, does that include online, social media, bullying? And the answer is yes.
But I think, I'm not opposed to actually making that more, either add another bullet or working in social media, so it's
Yeah.
explicit.
Yeah.
Because I think clarity is really important. It's one of the things that we've really worked on with our language, and I think making sure that it's clear to students, just because you're on your phone across the street from the school, if what you're doing is impacting school life, it's still, this policy is law.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. With that. Is there any other discussion? All right, so all in favor of the first reading of policy JIC, student code of conduct?
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. I was thinking.
Yeah, we had a motion because we're in discussion. Yeah. All right, so all in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 6.5 is the first reading of policy JICIA, weapons, violence, and school safety. Do I have a motion to approve the first reading? No. Brayla, I'm sorry. Please take over. It has been a long evening. Please take over this discussion.
Happy to. This is like right on point for today's theme. So weapons, violence, and school safety. This was again, minor language adjustments like the last one. I'll run through them real quickly. We changed who it applies to include students, school staff, and volunteers. The language was just different throughout the policy. We just made it uniform throughout. So it always applies to students, school staff, and volunteers. We changed some old language, so willful malicious, that is legal mumbo jumbo from a long time ago. So we changed it to intentional damage to school property, stuff like that. So we were really trying to modernize language and make it clear for students who are reading this policy because it's applicable to them and to their parents. We changed the unit, school unit. We are not a school unit, we're a school department. There are school units in Maine. So we changed all the units over to departments. And then the one thing that we did substantively change this policy, so it's probably a place to pay the closest attention. We eliminated all the optional language regarding hunter's breakfast. So there are places in Maine, not typically in Scarborough, where firearms are brought onto campus for hunter's breakfast, and there's traditions and schools that have that tradition can deal with that in their policies. Because that's not a situation in Scarborough that we currently have, where hunting and hunting breakfasts are a tradition of this school, and firearms are not prohibited on our school grounds. What we did is we built an exception to the prohibition of possession and discharge of firearms on school property. It's under section 2, trying to find the page number. I think it's page 2 of 5. It's subsection 2 and it's B and in red, and we added it. And what we said is the superintendent may, in their discretion, authorize exceptions in advance on a case-by-case basis for a clear educational purpose. And what the committee discusses, if there's a legitimate educational purpose, and what we thought of is if we had a revolutionary display and they brought in something that looked like a firearm, which would violate our policy, the superintendent in their discretion, if they could find a clear educational purpose, could allow that to be brought on. Same if they did if a group wanted to do a hunter safety course, and that was something that for an educational purpose, this district decided they wanted to allow on the property. In order to have that course, they would have to allow a firearm on the premises. We didn't want a policy that would absolutely bar that and require a change from this body to allow something that the superintendent in their discretion believed was necessary or would be helpful for the school and school as a whole. So it sort of streamlines that. We assume this would be a very little, like not very used provision, but if it came up, it would be there for that reason. But this is the place there, it should be the most discussion because we did add this in. We did strike the hunter breakfast exception. Other than that, I don't think we made any other changes, again, units to departments. But there you have it.
Perfect. Thank you, Brayla. Do I have a motion to approve the first reading of policy JICIA, weapons, violence, and school safety?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Right, all in favor? Perfect, it's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 6.6 are the meeting minutes of May 4th, 2023. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 6.7 are appointments. 6.7.1 is the high school math teacher.
Yeah, so Nicole Petherbridge has been nominated to fill this position created from a retirement. Ms. Petherbridge earned her Bachelor of Arts degree from Colby College and Masters of Science degree from UPenn. She's been teaching math at St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire since 2020. That's our recommendation for our high school math teacher.
All right, perfect. Do I have a motion to approve the high school math teacher as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Perfect, it's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 6.7.2 is the high school STEM teacher.
Stacy Wood has been chosen to fill this position created from a retirement. Ms. Wood received her Bachelor's of Science degree in Biomedical Engineering from Boston College and earned her master's degree in Curriculum and Instruction from Northwest Nazarene University and her master's in STEM from Boise State University. She's taught math and science at Nampa High School in Nampa, Idaho, and then most recently has been a physics teacher at Casco Bay High School since 2015.
Perfect. Do I have a motion to approve the high school STEM teacher as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Perfect, it's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 6.7.3 is the middle school science teacher.
So Peter Hill has been selected to fill this position created by resignation. Mr. Hill earned his Bachelor's of Arts degree in biology from Bowdoin and his Master's of Science education from USM. He's been a middle school science teacher for 14 years, 11 at King Middle School in Portland and 3 at Sanford Junior High School. For 5 years, he was also teaching strategist at King Middle School and most recently the assistant principal at Wyndham Middle School.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the middle school science teacher as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Perfect, it's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 7.0 is adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.